Now, this is fascinating because we're in the middle of trying to sort out this other aspect about the Nixon time capsule and Robert Merritt's working with Nixon. Your thing is presidential UFOs. Whitehouse UFO is your UFO, your YouTube channel. You know the presidential aspects around UFOs better than anybody. Give me just a couple of minutes of Nixon and the UFO topic. We have the Jackie Gleason story. I think it is powerful, and it is backed up by solid evidence. So why don't we start with that?
Well, I went to the National Archives. People have to realize that Nixon is significant because he doesn't have his own. He has a presidential library now, but at that time he didn't, because Nixon tried to grab the files. He claimed that the files were owned by the president. He was loading the files into trucks, and he was actually stopped. They had this big court battle, and it was determined that the public owned the files. So I went to the National Archives to look at the Nixon UFO files, and it was the same as all the other presidential libraries. There were no files. There are no UFO files in the presidential libraries because it's plausible deniability. Right. You don't want everybody to know that the president knows what's going on. So you move the stuff away. And where I sort of confirmed that was that because there's no UFO files doesn't mean the president doesn't know about UFOs. What I did is I went to Hal Puthoff, because Hal Puthoff had run the remote viewing program and he was running the thing. And I said to him, did they brief the president on remote viewing? And he said, yes, up until, I think he said Bush, Vice President Bush or something. He said until that point, yes, the president was being briefed. And after that, I guess he left the program or whatever, but he confirmed it. Yes, there are no remote viewing documents in the presidential files.
That, yeah. Okay.
But yet we know for sure that remote viewing was being dealt with because Jimmy Carter talked about it and all this kind of stuff. There was presidents that talked about it. So when I went to look at the files, all there was in the Nixon files was a very significant. He's the only president that ever, I think, wrote a letter, an actual UFO letter. People would always write letters. You'd have the file where people are sent. He actually wrote a letter to a girl and actually tracked the girl down. She lived in Minnesota. He'd actually sent her a book, and he wrote about, we don't really think there's anything to this or something like that. And it was very significant. So I pulled that. But other than that, there was really nothing in the Nixon files. I did look at all the stuff. Like, for example, we knew the Jackie Gleason story because I had sent Robbie, was it Robbie Young, to do the interview. We had discovered Jackie Gleason's second wife was selling the silverware, and we had heard the rumored story about Jackie Gleason at the base in Florida at Homestead Air Force Base. And so when we discovered that Jackie Gleason's second wife, the one that was going to do the book that actually told the story about Gleason seeing the bodies, he went and did 2 interviews with her. And she basically, in the interviews that were done, said, yes, he either was running around with a woman or this actually happened, because he was very, very upset that night when he came home and told me the story and stuff like that. And she said that Jackie Gleason was very upset when she put this article. She was trying to push this book. So she put this article in the National Enquirer, I think it was 1983. He said that Gleason was very upset about this. So what I was checking in the Nixon file was, what about the base? And what I discovered is that Nixon's Southern White House was in Key Biscayne, and that he went there. I actually, in my webpage, I tell me it was a lot of times. It was like 50 or 75 times he flew down there. He would always fly to Homestead Air Force Base, and then he would take the Army helicopter from the base to the house. So he was at that base numerous times. And that was where this incident took place. Yeah. And the fact, I would check things like how, when this incident took place, like when did they golf? Because there was a story that this started on a golf course, that Jackie Gleason had this golf course outside of Miami that Nixon had come down there to do this golf tournament, this charity golf tournament. So that was the kind of stuff that most of the stuff I was doing in archives was trying to track down outside rumored stories of the president interacted with this person, and then trying to find the actual file on that person. Like this,
and just the 60-second time capsule of the story is that Nixon was talking with Gleason, who's a lifelong UFO kind of fanatic in a sense, and he eventually even had his home made into the shape of a saucer, right?
Yeah.
So they have this conversation, and what happens?
And well, they have this conversation, and then later that night, Nixon appears in the car by himself and picks up Gleason, and Gleason's about 20 miles from Homestead. They drive to Homestead. They come to the gate. The gate guy is very surprised, but salutes. They go in, and he takes them to a hangar, and he shows them these bodies. And Gleason describes the fact that he shows them the bodies, takes him back to his house, and then Nixon disappears. And that was one of the controversies that people said that Nixon, there's no way Nixon could have got away. There's no way Nixon, he's under Secret Service. He couldn't. And so one of the things I actually produced from Nixon files was that Nixon got away numerous times. The story that he would get the chef or somebody to drive him. He'd hide under a thing under the back seat. They would drive him out of the gate. Then the guy would go back and he would drive, and they would pick him up in a hotel or in a bar in Washington. They would always, that Nixon had done this a number of times, that escaped his Secret Service. So that was the kind of stuff I was verifying. And the Gleason thing, Gleason had actually stated that he talked to a number of presidents about UFOs, that he had discussed UFOs. So, but it's the same old thing. It was almost impossible to verify the story. Yeah. You had the story. It seemed to make sense, but there was no absolute thing that would confirm the story.
And just the punchline of the whole story is Nixon took him into the Homestead Air Force Base and showed him dead alien bodies.
Yeah.
Which is pretty hardcore, which is interesting with Gleason's interested in that. I mean, I was looking at a program from 1958, which had Gleason calling in to a UFO program and talking about what was going on there. So we know Gleason had the deep interest in it. And if the ex-wife confirmed the story, it gives it a lot of credence. Let's face it. It's not one of those urban legends. It really has some substance.
Yeah. But there's always this plausible deniability around the president, that it's so hard to confirm any of these stories like, there was the one with Spielberg with a number of the presidents. With Jimmy Carter, there's a bizarre thing happened with Jimmy Carter, that apparently Close Encounters of the Third Kind was Jimmy Carter's #1 movie. And there was this rumored story that NASA had put up $20 million for the movie. And then in exchange, Jimmy Carter got a personal copy of the movie, and he was watching this movie. So when I go to the Carter library, I'm of course looking for the Steven Spielberg file. And in the Steven Spielberg file, like in the presidential record, anybody who's interacted with the president, whether you've talked to him on the phone, whether you've been in a dinner with 200 people, you're on a list, or whether you've actually had a meeting with the president, it's called an alpha file. That you go into this alpha file that shows that you had a phone conversation or a meeting or whatever. So I'm looking for the alpha file for Steven Spielberg, and the archivist at the library is very interested in UFOs. He actually went to school with Chip Carter, and he said that the date for the Carter sighting is actually wrong. It was actually, he believed it was 67, not 69, because he was in school with Chip Carter, and he said Chip Carter told him the story about the UFO sighting, and it was before 69. So here's this archivist who's really into this kind of stuff. He was like really into the UFO thing. So I have not a guy who's trying to hide stuff. He's actually helping me look for stuff. And so he pulls the file on Spielberg, and this bizarre thing happens. I look at the file, and what you have is a picture of Steven Spielberg and Rosalind Carter and Jimmy Carter, and they're in a pose where they're shaking hands. And yet you have an envelope and a letter, and one is over Spielberg's face and one over Jimmy Carter's face. And you can tell it's them, but you can't. And it's a photocopy of a photograph. So the archivist actually tried, because we've got the number of the photograph, tried to find the photograph, and there is no photograph. We were trying to find the photograph. So there's this bizarre thing at the thing that shows that Jimmy Carter and Spielberg did have this meeting, but it's not in the file. If you look to see, there's no record of them ever having a phone call, ever a meeting and stuff like that. And yet in this alpha file, it actually shows this photocopy of a photo of these two. So it's these kind of bizarre things. And
Spielberg, we know that Spielberg screened ET at the Reagan White House. So Spielberg had that presidential connection. He's incredibly, it's interesting because in that Nixon period, they're trying to work through Emmenegger and get a documentary done, like sort of an inside guy, someone who works in advertising, who is, has the film background, but he's a friend of Haldeman, so they can kind of get it in that way. By the time you get into Reagan and stuff, they're trying to figure out who in the Hollywood scene they could work with to get this out.
Yeah, because Bob, you got to remember, Bob was really not the connect. He had the connection. He'd worked on the Nixon re-election campaign on the advertising, but it was actually
Alan
Sandler who was the guy.
Yeah,
Sandler was the connection. He was the guy that would bring in the CIA. He's the one that made the contracts, and his wife really didn't. I think she sort of figured that Sandler was always getting Bob into trouble with different stuff, dragging him into different projects. She didn't want him doing stuff like that. And but she said that Alan was tremendously resourceful. She said you could give him a stick and a piece of gum in the morning, and by night he'd made money. Wow. And there was an incident, and it may have to do with the UFO cover-up live. They needed regression people. I think they regressed burrows, or they were doing some regression or whatever. And so they asked Sandler, and Sandler said, hang on. He went out, and the two guys that did the regression were both CIA people. That within 10 minutes, he had regression people to do regressions, because Bob was doing all these other documentaries. And it was another documentary they were doing where Alan produces these CIA guys, psychiatrists.
What's the last major thing that Sandler has done that you can think of?
Well, Sandler has the vault. Sandler had the production studio. It was Bob that was doing the writing and all this kind of stuff. And but they haven't done anything for. It was in the 70s. I don't think they've really done anything after 1980. They were out of it, and because they've had separate jobs. I don't know what. And you got to remember, Alan Sandler's never really gone on camera. Linda's talked to him. Linda's had interactions. I've never even talked to the guy. I've always known Bob, so I don't really know what his thing was. Bob had his other job, and he retired, moved to Arkansas, and has really done no programs after that on anything, not UFOs.
I put out an offer for Bob to come on the show. So if you do run across him, tell him he's certainly welcome. Yeah.
Well, apparently I just had a producer talk to him on another thing, and apparently his memory is not that good. He's getting fairly old. He will tell you the stories, but he may repeat the same stories over and over again. His wife is more into exactly what happened, but it's not her story.
It's kind of fascinating, actually, when we look at all this. One of the big pieces around this Nixon time capsule that's going on is there's a letter now out from the former Watergate lawyer Douglas Caddy, representing Merritt, and asking the National Archives to take the directions to the time capsule and take possession of the document, but he wants the document read to the public and the media. You've been around this National Archives and this kind of research, and what do they do with a request like that, in your opinion? I mean, this is somebody who they just added a great deal of material for in relation to Watergate from FOIA requests. So his documents are on file there. And Caddy, of course, being the Watergate lawyer for the 7 burglars, he's a well-known historical personage. But in your opinion, just looking at that end of it, what do they do with a letter like that?
I think they absolutely do anything but answer the letter. I mean, they will stonewall it, because you got to put yourself in the position of the guy who's the archivist at National Archives. Are you going to create a situation where you're going to confront Donald Trump and the White House and say, we have to come into the White House and we're going to stage this thing on TV? I mean, if it turns out like the vault, with the Titanic thing, where nothing is there, I mean, everybody at the National Archives is fired. I had one example of dealing with them, and that has to do with, I'm sort of famous for getting the Rockefeller Initiative documents, the 1,000 pages of documents from the Clinton Library. And what happens there, I get the actual documents. I've got, all the 1,000 pages. I file an appeal. I get another 100 pages of other documents that they left out. And so when Clinton Library opens up, I, of course, put in my 100 FOIAs, and I request the 1,000 pages of documents from the Rockefeller Initiative. And the Clinton Library comes back and says, we don't have them. And I said, well, you got to have them. I mean, I've got it. And I sent them the actual FOIA request and the answer from the FOIA that lists all the documents, the dates, who was the letter from here to here, whatever. And they said, no, we don't have them. You got to go to the National Archives. Maybe they've got them. So I go to the National Archives and they say, no, we have nothing either. And this is from the Office of Science and Technology Policy. They say, no, we don't have it. So I filed an appeal with the National Archives. I said, you got to have these files. There's no way you don't have these files. And again, I sent him all the details. No stuff. I lost the appeal. So basically, you have these 1,000 pages of Rockefeller Initiative documents that are now missing. They're gone. And nobody knows where they are. Nobody cares. And I have actual copies. I have copies of 1,000 pages. One of the suggestions was that I take the documents, make photocopies, and send them to the Clinton Library and say, you're missing some documents. You better put them in the files. So the National Archives moves at the speed of mud. They are not going to take any risks. Even if you listen to John Greenwald talking about these FOIAs now with the films, with the Navy intelligence, he said, you could be talking 5 years before you get replies. So it's the risk thing, where you're not going to take the risk. If you're the head of the National Archives, you're not going to put yourself in a position where you're going to confront the White House and say, we got to come in the White House with cameras and all these people, and we're going to read this letter. And it's sort of like, you know, let the next guy deal with this. They'll make excuses. That's my prediction. It's not really going to go anywhere. It's an interesting confrontation, though. It does sort of put it on the record.
No question about it. At this point, all we know about them is that they've received the document, that they've received the letter with the request, and that you know, the directions that Merritt is willing to give them, and they can take possession of the document and all the rest. So it is, the offer stands there right now. That's where it's at. But how would you, if you were looking at a situation like this, beyond the National Archives, what would be your other kind of approach on this?
Well, I think the approach they took was right. I mean, I think that's the best you can do. For sure, if Robert has got this, I would say, I mean, he's got to have his own time capsule. And he has to have a bunch of people that know, because, I mean, if, say, he died last night, the story's over. I mean, it's game over. He's the only guy that knows where this is. So he has to protect his story and then hope that he can maybe get the New York Times or get somebody to put some pressure on the National Archives, because alone the National Archives is not going to take that kind of step. This is government. This is a very controversial type thing that you can't guarantee anything. So I think that's all you can really do is verify your story, that, you know, where it is, without giving it away, and put as much pressure on the National Archives as you can, make it as public as you can, and hope that somehow somebody asks Trump. But even if you take the Trump situation with for example, the To the Stars, I mean, you have these two videos, you have this big New York Times thing, and the White House reporter, this guy from the Hill, asks Sarah Sanders, is Donald Trump interested in UFOs? And is he going to refund this program? And she said, I'll talk to him and I'll get back to you. They totally ignored it. Then I contacted the reporter. I said, did she get back to you? Even he won't talk to me. So that's gone under it's the old deal is, unless you put an awful lot of pressure, they're not going to do anything, because this is a deadly sort of thing. You don't want the president in this thing, because I differ from other people. I say the president knows exactly what's going on. The president is the Wizard of Oz. The president's running the cover up, and you'll do everything you can in your power to keep him out of this thing, because you can have the Secretary of State go down, doesn't matter. Defense go down, the president goes down, the country goes down. And so you do everything you can to, you know, keep the president out of the storyline of UFOs, because this is it's like a toxic issue. It's just something which doesn't really get you elected. There's so many bad things. And that's why they're doing the gradual disclosure thing, is to try to release it as slowly as possible so that it doesn't blow up in everybody's faces.
Do the people on the inside want the message themselves?
Oh, absolutely. I say that the vast majority of the people on the team that are pushing this To the Stars thing are all experiencers. Jim Semivan, for sure. The guy that's that Melinda Leslie interviewed, definitely is an experiencer. One of the people on the team that's working on the experiencers is an experiencer. There's a NASA guy that's an experiencer. I've heard that Hal Puthoff has an experience when he was very young. So you have all these people who have a sort of a vested interest in getting this out. But it's playing inside the game. It's playing the rules. We've even got in some emails I've actually got where a guy's named Rick Dearborn has come up, who's the deputy chief of staff for policy at the White House. His name is on these emails, as if he's the point man. This is what I'm told. He's the point man for this story in the White House. So you have this thing going, and they're trying to gradually move it out there, gradually get the story, but protect it from being going viral. Because that's what happened to the Area 51 story. Once George Knapp did it, it went viral, and that's when Bill Clinton had to take away some more land, because suddenly you had this, all these people. They had Billy Goodman, this radio guy from Las Vegas, taking buses up there.
You're right.
People up there watching the base, and they actually had to take the land away to stop people. The story sort of got out of control, and that's the kind of thing they're trying to avoid, is where the story sort of gets out of control. What they've done is brilliant in terms of the To the Stars thing. What they did was they basically, and I was told this a year ago, and I didn't believe it would happen. They said high-level government officials are going to out themselves, and they're going to say this thing's for real. It's exactly what happened. And nobody burned down the White House. Nobody did anything. It actually went out that you had Elizondo, Justice, Mellon, Putoff, and Semivan all come out and say this story's for real. And they're all got reputable backgrounds inside the government, and nothing happened. And yet the way you see the deniability thing is when you file the FOIs, and apparently there's 1,500 FOIs have been filed on this case, the government says, no, we didn't release any documents. No, what do you mean? They say, we have no documents. We didn't release the films, and they're playing the same game again. It's like, we don't know what you're talking about. Right. And so the story's out there, and nobody can confirm it with documents or actual confirmations from the Defense Department. Defense Department's playing like they don't know what's going on.
Which is kind of a schizophrenic situation. There's no question about it. But they've been at this for a while, as you pointed out. So if we take the 45 years, say, from the time capsule situation with Nixon and him pushing the Emma Egger documentary before backing off from it, and you bring that all the way up. Now let's bring that up to date to all the stuff that you've done. And we certainly will save the whole TTSA story for another interview for sure, but just a quick update on that. One of the main things that's come out recently is that Elizondo now says he didn't bring the films out. Yeah. Right. So he's backing up that. Just tell me how you feel about that. You've been tracking that story so closely. And of course he was talking to Knapp, who let it go by. So it's pretty outrageous, isn't it?
Well, no, that's the way it works. This is what I'm saying. This is how it works. This is what I said. When it first came out, I immediately said, I call it the high hurdle. How did they get the videos out? Because whatever you do, if you bring a legitimate document, that's why there's no legitimate documents. They're all fake. They've all been altered, because it's the high hurdle. If you can get a document that's actually confirmed, that you can go to the National Archives and find the document, it's game over. It all starts to unravel and you can't control it. Or if you bring out a film, like if you actually bring out the government releases a film and says, this is a legitimate film, we're backing this up, this is an actual film of a UFO, you lose control of the story. So what you do is you have these gradual releases where it comes out and the Defense Department is denying it. Elizondo is talking about it. So that's what he's saying. I didn't release the film, which is true. I don't release the film. It's controlled by the Defense Department. The Defense Department released the film. The same as when we interviewed Jim Semivan. We said, is this being greenlighted by the Defense Department? And he said, yes, it is. So this is this thing that they're getting the videos out. And that's where I say they may alter the video a little bit, or there's some way they're doing it. Because if they wanted a legitimate Nimitz video with the trailer that shows it's top secret, with even this thing with the chain of custody. So you say the chain of custody is classified. Well, come on. You say, we're going to prove we've got the chain of custody, but it's classified. We can't show it to you. What's the difference? It's the same thing. That's like this plausible deniability thing, that nobody can confirm that Nimitz video is actually for real. They're saying it's for real. The Defense Department is denying it. And you end up in this sort of thing where you get the stories bouncing around, and that's what they want. They don't want you to confirm the story. So this is where they play these sort of games. And now they're in a situation where they're facing 1,500 FOIAs, and they may have to confirm the actual existence of the program. But as far as I know, at this point, the Defense Department is not saying there is an ATIP program. They are not confirming that.
That's particularly interesting. Certainly a lot of air has gone out of that balloon since that presentation back in October. One of the things that really was the cherry on top was when it was discovered by an English newspaper that they had used a Mylar balloon when they were doing the presentation for the Tic Tac video. That was actually a balloon picture that they showed at the presentation. Are those kind of mistakes on purpose?
Well, I talked to Eric Davis about it, and he was very upset. I think I may have discovered it before them. I asked Eric Davis about it, and he said that because this was October the 11th, they still didn't have the film. So they put something up, and they used the film. They used the picture from this fighter article that had appeared in 2015, and there was a mistake. And Jim Semivan also told Melinda Leslie, yeah, they made some mistakes, that they shouldn't have done this. So I don't think it was not intentional. And I'm pretty sure if you look at the video, at no time does Chris Mellon turn around and say that is the object. That is the Tic Tac. He does not. People are making references to the fact that he actually said, and he never said that. That picture just appears behind him, and he's talking about the incident. So yeah, that was a mistake. That's where Jim Semivan told Melinda Leslie, we're going to be very sure before we release something else that these things don't backfire, that we have all this sort of stuff. But part of this is what they want. They want the story to fall apart. This is how the Bob Lazar thing. Bob Lazar is missing the 2 master's degrees. Bob Lazar knows John Lear. You have all these sort of things, and that's why they use people like say Dan Smith, who's the spokesman for Ron Pandolfi. He's not allowed to actually take any tapes from Ron Pandolfi. He's not allowed to produce any emails from Ron Pandolfi. It's all word of mouth. And Dan Smith is this guy who talks about eschatology, and he thinks he's the Messiah, and he's here to bring disclosure. And he's this really sort of oddball character. That's what they want. Those are the kind of people they give the story to.
Can you tell the story about the bus and this idea about taking the bus and?
Yeah, the disclosure bus. But he's always talking. If you try to read his stuff on Open Minds, it gives you a headache. And that's what you want. You want this stuff to sort of bounce around so you don't end up in a situation like Area 51, where suddenly the thing gets out of control and suddenly everybody realizes this is for real, and you have Nippon television and you have the European television and everybody's descending on the place. You want this plausible deniability, which is what you've got now with the fact that the Defense Department is saying, no, we didn't release this stuff. We didn't release these.
But doesn't it make Elizondo look like a boob? I mean, that's what it looks like to me. I mean,
but that's what they want. That's what they want, because if they want it out, they would actually give Elizondo something he can release and say, this is it. This is the actual thing. They're not giving him anything that's concrete. It's the same. It's the same plan. That's what I saw the Tom DeLonge thing. I said, this is the same. They're doing the same thing. This is the Bill Moore thing. For example, let me give you an example. Bill Moore. Well, let me give you an example with Linda Howe. 1983, Linda Howe goes to see Richard Doty at Kirkland Air Force Base, April of 1983. He sits her down in a chair and he shows her this MJ-12 document. He says, the government didn't like the documentary you did on cattle relations. He's a counterintelligence agent. He sits her down. He shows her these documents. What happens with the New York Times article? Most people don't realize that there are 3 newspapers that have all done it. And I've tried to contact I'm probably the only person that's tried to contact all the newspapers. How did you find out? Did you discover the story? Did someone leak the story? If you listen to Leslie Kane's story of how she was contacted, it's the Linda Howe 1983 story. She was contacted by U.S. intelligence, people she knew in U.S. intelligence, and they said, we've got a story for you. We want you to talk to Lou Elizondo. She goes to Washington to talk to Lou Elizondo. Now, I don't know who paid for the plane ticket, whether it was U.S. intelligence, whether it was her who paid for the hotel room. She goes to Washington. She talks to Lou Elizondo. It's October the 4th. So he's still working. He hasn't quit yet. He's still an agent. He's a counterintelligence agent, the same as Richard Doty. He gives her documents. He shows her, here's some documents. Look at these documents. He gives her documents. Nobody gave me any documents. They gave them to Leslie Kane. Then he shows her documents that link Senator Reid into the whole thing. She's got these documents. She goes back, talks to Ralph Blumenthal. He pitches the thing to the New York Times. The New York Times takes it. If you look at the Washington Post article, they say they've got documents too. So they produced documents for the New York Times. They produced documents for the Washington Post, and they spun the whole story. And yet the documents aren't released. The Defense Department's backing off the thing, and it looks like it's falling apart. But every single time they put out a story, they want it to fall apart. That's what you do. That's what Valet called the dangling carrot. You put the carrot out, everybody grabs for the carrot, and they pull the carrot back. It's the same story all the time.
Where are they heading?
Well, they're doing more. They're going to do more and more and more of this stuff. They've got the 24 videos. They've got these files. And according to John Greenwald, we will get those 38 technical reports. We will get the material. Just because Bob Bigelow owns the contract, the stuff that he produced for the government is still owned by the government. So according to John Greenwald, all the stuff that was done in that contract is still going to be FOIA material that we can get the contracts and stuff. So it's going to take a long time. But as John Greenwald said, it could be 5 years. He's actually filed what they call an expedited FOIA, 27 pages long, to try to get himself to the front of the line because he realizes they can drag this thing out forever. Right. I've actually filed an FOIA, and my FOIA says I want all the FOIAs. I want to see what the Washington Post asked for, what the New York Times asked for, because they're going to have a lot of inside details that I don't have. They're going to ask for certain documents that will tell me what's going on. So
you're going to be famous.
It's a long process, and they want it to be a long process.
One thing that's interesting about all this, well, once we see all these CIA people popping up around the DeLong disclosure thing, that's when we knew, the effort was on, and in many cases, the same team was on. So, but let's do this. I'm going to turn things over to Olivia in a minute here. But thank you everyone for being here. It's Dark Journalist, and I'm here talking with GrantCameron, going over so many different aspects around disclosure. We just did the Coast last night with Linda Moulton Howe about the exclusive interview that I had with Robert Merritt on February 14th, and Merritt's story about the time capsule that President Nixon placed in the White House and his confidence that the time capsule is still there and that Nixon wanted to be the disclosure president is supported in many ways by what we've heard about Robert Emenegger's involvement in this documentary and the Republican administration supporting that documentary up to a point, even giving them this Holloman Air Force Base material before yanking it at the last minute. And we can see when we watch the documentary, it's missing all these kind of crucial points, but there it is. And the reason it was created in the first place was apparently, Grant called it the most important disclosure case that we've had, which is the most important disclosure effort. So I think that that's significant. It took place under Nixon, and we have Merritt sort of finding Nixon in this situation where he's safeguarding the alien disclosure thing through this time capsule for himself and his efforts. After all, there are many reports that as vice president, he ran the program to develop Area 51. Go ahead.
Can I just add a little thing why this is the most, I didn't actually specify why it's the most important disclosure.
Yes.
The reason it's the most important disclosure is that, as I always point out in my lectures, if you want to disclose, you just put the president out and tell us. If you want to cover up, you just shut up and quit talking about it. So they're doing something in between. They're not doing either of those things. They're doing this sort of gradual disclosure. What happens, the Nixon thing is very important because in 1969, the American government shuts down Blue Book.
Right.
They no longer have to put any Air Force guys out to explain UFO sightings. They're out of the game. They never have to talk about UFOs again. And every country in the world has done that. The British shut down. The Canadians shut down. They say there's no threat to national security. We have no evidence of ETs visiting the Earth. It's a waste of time. We're going to save money. We're out of the program. So in 1969, the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. government never, ever had to talk about UFOs again. So the embers are sort of dying out in 1972, 1973. And what do? They come along with a bunch of gas and they start the fire. So if you didn't have to talk about it, why would you go to Bob Emenegger and say, we'd like you to do a UFO documentary? Why would you do that? You're out of the thing. Shut up. You can do Black World investigations of UFOs. This proves that they actually wanted it out. Otherwise, they would just shut up and they wouldn't have done it. So that's why the Emenegger one is the most important, because they had actually shut the whole program and they never, ever had to talk about it again.
It's absolutely fascinating. Stanton Friedman completely agrees with you that they were preparing for some kind of major disclosure at that period under Nixon during that Watergate sort of 72, 73. before that really broke big. And who knows, in the grand scheme of things, what the plan became. But certainly this idea of a time capsule is interesting because not only was Merritt such an insider around this whole thing, but the idea that, you know, Nixon would be making this effort and giving a copy of the letter to Kissinger, but storing it somewhere in the White House. It is so interesting because if he wanted to go down in history around this, if he had done all this work setting it up and reignited it after Blue Book got sort of killed, then this would make a lot of sense, which is he's going to preserve it somehow in there. So if this comes out, he's the disclosure president.
Yeah.
And there are some weird things there about timing, because when he says to Merritt in their conversation, you know, Merritt says, well, when is this going to come out? How will you know? And he says, oh, it'll definitely come out. It's going to be discovered. So he has some sort of a time you know, that he's working with. There's a timeline that he feels when it's going to come out, and it will vindicate him and all of the work that he did, you know, opening up Russia, opening up China, and he's being undone by Watergate, you know. So it's pretty fascinating when we look at it in the context of the whole thing. But you saying that first effort with Emenegger is the most important is interesting to me, because I don't think enough investigation around that whole thing has ever been done. You've done the best on it. And now I think we're getting some context for the time capsule story by understanding that the Nixon administration was engaged in very early UFO disclosure.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think to remember with the Nixon thing is that when you shut down Blue Book, I think the reason they shut down Blue Book is we know what's going on now. We've got the sightings. We've got all the stuff. They have moved this. One of the rumored stories was that in '69, all they do is move it from the white world to the black world. And they move the contracts, all the back engineering into private industry. So you've got control of the story. You don't need to get sighting reports from people anymore. You don't need any input. We've got this, but we still have to educate the people. We still have to, we can't shut it off. It's the same thing they did when Ron Pandolfi shut down the remote viewing program in 1995. It wasn't that they didn't believe that remote viewing was, it was, we don't want to do this in the white world anymore. It was starting to leak. Jim Mars was going to do a book on this thing. He had discovered this. So what you do is you move it into the black world and you can do it. But the Nixon thing was important because at that point they're trying to educate the people. They've got the story. They've got it under control. They're doing the engineering and stuff, but you still can't shut off the people. You still realize sooner or later this thing may get out of control, and you've got to do what the Brookings Institute report said is at some point this is going to come out, and the lower civilization could get wiped out. So you have to do this properly. So they're going by the book. They're taking the advice of these. And I think Bigelow had actually stated there was more than the Brookings Institute. There was other think tanks who had come to the same conclusion, that you've got to sort of gradually leak this stuff out.
Fascinating. You mentioned something there about Reagan at the end of his administration trying to get this out and leaving it as kind of a legacy for the American people. Do you think the president, when he's in there and he's worked with this and he understands it, just as he's leaving, he's thinking, I have to do something? And I'm trying to get into Nixon's head a little bit with this, because there's this famous story that I found in a biography of Nixon and Eisenhower, where Eisenhower keeps this major time capsule called Project X at his Gettysburg farm. And I'm wondering if this is what got Nixon into this mindset of, I have to leave this legacy. But when you get into the heads of these presidents, if you think of someone like Nixon, the idea that, you know, like you were saying about Reagan, he wanted to leave this legacy, leave something behind for people to understand, you know, the whole alien issue, to kind of give them that.
Yeah, I think each president does stuff that tries to move the issue out. Jimmy Carter had his press secretary go to the FBI. He had his science advisor go and try to get another Blue Book study going in NASA. There was a famous story told where he sent this girl to the CIA with the lawyers to force all the CIA documents, and this girl breaks down crying. She's so stressed out by the fact that she's under pressure from the White House. So Jimmy Carter was doing all this stuff with the thing with Alfred Weber at SRI, where they were going to do this study at SRI. He was doing that. Bill Clinton did the thing with the Roswell thing. People always don't realize with the Roswell thing, they think, oh, it's like, oh, the U.S. Air Force went and did Roswell. They don't realize the U.S. Air Force did not do Roswell because they didn't have anything better to do. They needed to spend some money. They did it because Lawrence Rockefeller went there and he was putting Clinton under great pressure. And so Clinton's science advisor had said, Mr. Rockefeller, if this is as deep, and this is in the documents, if this is as deep as you say it is, and as widespread as you say it is, we're not going to be able to get to the bottom of this. Give us one case, and we'll investigate that case, and then we'll declassify it, and then we'll declassify the rest of it. And that's when Lawrence Rockefeller said, okay, I want you to do the Roswell case. And that's why Bill Clinton gave a green light, and the Air Force had to go and reinvestigate Roswell in 1993, 1994. In 1995, Bill Clinton sees the final report, and he makes this famous speech in Belfast, Northern Ireland, where he's lighting the Christmas tree, where he has this letter from Ryan, which I could not find this letter. Ryan, if you're out in the audience tonight, no, as far as I know, a UFO did not crash in Roswell, New Mexico. But if they did recover alien bodies, they didn't tell me about it either, and I want to know. And what he's basically saying is that the report, the first Roswell report that cost millions of dollars, put out by the Air Force, didn't talk about the alien bodies. So in 1997, the Air Force has to go and do a second Roswell report. They spend $20 million on a second one, and that's when they come up with
crash dummies
theory. And that's to say to the president, here's the answer. And all of them do. Like Obama, at the end, 2 days before Obama leaves the White House, they put these millions of pages of stuff on remote viewing. CIA puts on the internet with UFOs in remote viewing. In November of 2015, he makes the statement, which I say there's no way he could not have known this was going to get picked up. And that was, he's given this interview to GQ magazine, and the guy says to him, well, if you're the president, you get to see all the secrets. What's the deal with the secrets? And Obama starts in on UFOs. He doesn't have to bring up UFOs. And Obama brought it up numerous times, almost like he's hinting at it. He's putting little things out where he says to Shirley MacLaine, oh, when I wanted to know about Area 51, I asked Shirley MacLaine, and then he says, you know, I'm probably the first president ever to talk about Area 51 in public. Right. That's when Area 51 got declassified, because Obama talked about it. And then in this GQ magazine, he says, you know, people always ask me about UFOs and Roswell and aliens, and I just want to let you know that that top secret stuff isn't as exciting as you think it is. And the GQ magazine guy totally misses it. He actually hands it to him. And so you get this kind of stuff where they're actually doing this kind of stuff. They can't openly do the thing, but they're trying to push the ball down the field. And you see with all the presidents, the different things that they're doing. When you look behind the scenes, you go, oh, I see what he's doing now. He's not directly doing it, but he's making a move to push this stuff out.
It looks like Poppy, according to everything that you've said, and this goes along with a lot of things that I've read, which is basically Poppy Bush was the last president that had a handle on the UFO issue. That Clinton, when you get into Clinton and, well, I guess, you know, W, but it doesn't seem like he had a great interest in it, although Cheney is associated with these stories very often. But it seems like the real power broker on the presidential level that was left is George Bush.
Well, see, I disagree with people on that. I think they all knew. I think it's all the plausible deniability. They want you to think the president's an idiot. He doesn't know what's going on. They want you to chase the Wizard of Oz, the cabal, because you're never going to find them. You're never going to get them because it's not there. And that's why when Clinton said, Stephen Greer sends these files when I look at them in the Clinton library, there's 600 pages of documents that Clinton got from Stephen Greer, this briefing document. And Stephen says he there's a briefing thing. It says right on the front of the page of the thing, President did not read. And that's the plausible deniability thing. The president got all these documents he didn't read. But the message comes back from Bill to Stephen Greer, from this friend of Bill, that says, I can't do it, but you can. And that's the whole thing, is that why Hillary Clinton didn't bring up the UFO subject. She only answered questions. They want us to do it. That's why they're moving. What I believe they're doing is they're moving the UFO thing into private industry, into the Bigelow thing. Then Bigelow is going to do disclosure. All of these guys are retired. None of them are operational. So the day before Lou Elizondo joins the thing, he retires. Steve Justice retires 2 weeks before. They're all retired. They move into private industry. So Bigelow makes the disclosure. The government's off the hook. That's what they're trying to avoid. That's the thing that they're trying, what I call the high hurdle. That if the government comes out and says this document's for real, then suddenly you're the president that's standing there. You got 3,000 reporters are saying there was 10,000 mutilated cattle. Are you saying you knew what was going on? There's been millions of people abducted. That's the kind of stuff, the scenario they don't want. So they're doing this thing. They move it into private industry. almost the thing where Bill Clinton says, you can do it, but I can't. So they want us to do the disclosure and get them off the hook, because they're in this very difficult position where once they admit that they knew what was going on, they lose control of the story.
Yeah, well, no, I see your point about the presidential part. However, we've seen over and over again, people like Carter, like you were describing, they're trying to get the power back on the UFO file. They're trying to get access to the information. They might have a kind of a general, you know, the titular head of the government, but it doesn't seem like, you know, if we go through the different cases like Kennedy to Carter, I mean, I think they do create this idea of the kind of, you know, the president who's out of the loop for plausible deniability. However, there are multiple cases of presidents from Eisenhower trying to get that information from the UFO file back.
Okay, but I would differ. Like the one story that everybody always brings out is a story about Jimmy Carter. And this is a story that everybody gets it all mixed up. Jimmy Carter has the briefing from Bush Sr. Right. Bush Sr. is the VP, or he's the CI director for Ford.
Right.
And I had a person who interviewed Ford, interviewed Bush Sr. They both said they had seen the Holloman Air Force Base film. So what happens is everybody says, well, Bush was CI director under Carter. Absolutely never happened. Rosalind Carter said he will not serve a single day under this administration. They fired him. So everybody says, oh, he's afraid of Bush. Bush was this powerful guy. Jimmy Carter was this weak little guy who couldn't handle it. And he fired him. He fired him. He never served a day. He was one of the few CI directors who was not carried on from the previous administration. So he fires him, and he hires Stansfield Turner, who was a Navy buddy of his that he could trust, because he didn't trust George Bush. What happens is, in the presidential briefing, what happened is it starts with Truman. Truman sets up this presidential briefing because when he became president, he didn't know there was an atomic bomb. He didn't know all this kind of stuff. And he set up the briefing for the new incoming president so the president would know what was going on when he gets in, all the things that he has to know. So this briefing is taking place in November of 1976. And that's when they ask for the UFO files. So the story's told, and it's told by Danny Sheehan, by Marcia Smith, who was doing 2 classified studies for Jimmy Carter. One was on UFOs, one was on extraterrestrials. Danny Sheehan said he saw both of the classified reports that went to Jimmy Carter. One said that we have between 2 and 6 extraterrestrial races visiting. UFOs are real, the whole thing. But what happens in the briefing is he says, the story is told, oh, he asked for the UFO files and he's told he can't have them. It's not what happened. Jimmy Carter said, the story was, he asked for the files, and Jimmy Carter says, curiosity is not sufficient need to know. If you want those files, you have to go. So he didn't refuse. He told him where to go. He says, you go to the House Science and Technology Committee for those files. That's
Bush talking to Carter.
Carter. So the top secret Roswell files are not going to be in the House Science and Technology Committee. What he was asking for, Jimmy Carter said in his promise, and we've actually got on tape, his promise was, if I become president, I will release all the UFO material except for stuff on national security weapons. So basically, he's got the top secret stuff, the weapon stuff. It's all tied into nuclear weapons. It's all tied into developing weapons and stuff like that. So he's got that already. He's asking for the files. He promised the people the files that weren't national security. So he asked Bush for those files. Bush said, if you want those files, the unclassified, the sort of lower classified stuff, that the House would have, but they would not have the Roswell file. And I'll give you another story that shows that Jimmy Carter knew. There's a story that was told. Senator Claiborne Pell was big time into UFOs. He was into paranormal phenomena. There's a story told that Claiborne Pell set up a meeting for John Alexander and Dr. Scott Jones. Dr. Scott Jones was the guy that went with Rockefeller to brief Clinton's science advisor. Set up a meeting for them to talk to Jimmy Carter. Now, Jimmy Carter is at the Carter Foundation years after he retired. The story that was told was that they didn't get a reply. So Scott Jones phones up the Carter Center and he said, oh, by the way, we got Claiborne Pell, who was the ranking Democratic senator at the time. And Carter's a Democrat. Right. The ranking guy sends this request for this meeting. And he said, we got this request. You got this request from Senator Claiborne Pell for this meeting. We'd like to know when we're going to get a reply. And the answer was, there will be no reply. Jimmy Carter is not going to sit down with John Alexander and Scott Jones and talk UFOs, because he's off the record. Even now, Carter's saying I don't believe in their extraterrestrials. I think it was something from a base. They were doing some testing at a base. He's totally backed away from the whole UFO thing and is running for cover. And so I say that that's the game they have to play. And that's why I say, like, now you have this Rick Dearborn. We've actually know the guy inside the White House who's actually the guy who's the point man on this whole operation. And again, you have Jimmy Trump, who's out of the loop. We can't even ask him a question.
Right, exactly. And I'll point out there, since you mentioned Pell, is that everyone knows that the Pell Grant, and that's where that comes from. He's the former senator from Rhode Island. So it is interesting when you track these people, and he has a very interesting history also. Okay, Olivia, you're up. We're going to take some questions here, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Okay, first question. Tim Taylor, Mr. Cameron, I have enjoyed your discussion thus far, but the internet has a burning question that needs to be answered. What type of caffeinated beverage do you consume?
You drink coffee, Grant?
McDonald's coffee. I always make the joke that Chris Bledsoe, the famous experiencer, and I were McDonald's coffee guys.
Okay. Moving on.
I'm going to go straight into kind of the overarching question here. Ron White, the UFO phenomenon is such a bunch of dots that are there to be connected. The problem is that no one can seem to connect all of the dots. Yes, the phenomenon exists, but what it is anyone's guess. What do you think it is?
Top secret Canadian government document. I bring it up all the time. Everybody seems to ignore it. Canadian government in 1950 went through classified channels through the Canadian Embassy. The guy, the military liaison's name was Arnold Wright, went to the Defense Research and Development Board, which was in charge of the atomic bomb, the hydrogen bomb, run by Vannevar Bush at one point, and said, what's the deal with flying saucers? And the top secret Canadian government memo, declassified 1978, the Canadian government does not deny it, said, we were told through classified channels the following things. Flying saucers exist. It's the most highly classified subject in the United States. There's a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush who's trying to figure out what's going on. It's of tremendous significance to the Americans, and mental phenomena may be involved. So we've known since 1950, basically the core story.
Wow, great. It's a great answer on that. And it's a good point too. The Wilbur Smith information is fascinating and I think needs more exploration. I know Paul Hellyer tried to bring some of that out. What else you got?
God, there's so many places we could go.
It's okay. Try to get what you think of the best. You have the good intuition there. Go ahead. Just go ahead. Just start with any of them. I like it.
Okay.
I like when there's a lot.
I know that we hit on this last time, but Matheson ask if they can reflect on the consciousness aspect.
Oh yeah, well that is a whole show in itself, and that is GrantCameron's thing. You know, Grant's come to he's come to the conclusion that most of the UFO phenomena is about consciousness.
That's what it comes down to. That's the whole bottom line. That's what Ben Rich said. John Alexander has said that. Jack Sarfati has said that. The Canadian government said that in 1950. Dr. Eric Walker from Penn State University told us that unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in. 14% of all experiencers claim that you fly the flying saucer with your mind. It's when it comes down to an idea about, is the world made of nuts and bolts, or is it made of consciousness? And I say it's made of consciousness. The material world is secondary to consciousness.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on.
Okay, Aaron White, ask Grant about asking Dick Cheney about UFOs.
Yes, asking Dick Cheney about UFOs.
Yeah, Dick Cheney, that was the thing where we're about to ask another guy. I can't talk about it, but we may know by the end of this month in San Francisco, we may be able to reveal the second guy. What I say is, if you get a high-level person, we've got another high-level person, the question you want to ask them is not, do you believe in UFOs? Have you seen a UFO? It's a total waste of time. They're going to walk around the question. The only question you want to ask is, did you get briefed? Did someone give you a classified briefing, walk into your office, swear you to secrecy, and tell you what the real story is, how the dots all get connected? So Dick Cheney had been chief of staff for President Ford. He had been Secretary of Defense under Bush Sr., and he was the vice president when I talked to him. So the question I asked him was, Mr. Cheney, in all your jobs in government, have you ever been briefed on the subject of UFOs? If so, when was it, and what were you told? And he hesitated because he didn't expect the question, I'm sure of it. And then he said, if I had been briefed on that subject, it would probably be classified and I wouldn't be talking about it.
Well, that's the first honest answer he ever gave. It's amazing. Okay, what else?
Okay, I've got a bunch of great questions from Alien Protocol.
Yes.
Does Grant know of any government concerted effort to communicate peacefully with ETs?
Peaceful efforts on behalf of the government to ETs.
Well, there's a lot of stuff going on with experiences. That would be something I'd be working on in the next year or two. But you have Chris Bledsoe would be one where the government is interacting with Chris Bledsoe and Chris Bledsoe is interacting with the beings. So you have these kind of things. That's why the consciousness thing is important, that you'll see part of the program that To the Stars has, except it's sort of a more top secret. That's what Jim Semivan told us. It's not really connected to the Stars. It's the one that works with the experiencers. And the experiencers are the ones that are interacting with the intelligence behind the phenomena. You can look at all the videos you want and all the documents you want. You're never going to learn anything. It's not until you actually deal with the experiencers who are actually having this mental interaction dealing with the beings. So they are working on this aspect of the phenomena dealing with the experiencers, because that's where all the answers are.
Does Grant believe they are ETs or time travelers?
I used to believe they're ETs. I now think it's all going to go back to consciousness. It's all the same thing. It's all one. Everything is the same. I've just got a book coming out on music and ETs, and it's all the same thing. It's all consciousness, and there's different levels of consciousness. There's different levels of beings. You go up through whatever, and they're just at a higher level of less dense, higher frequency, whatever you want. So it all ties in. So when you look at the CIA, they've always called it phenomenology. That would show you that we say that, okay, there's ETs, there's remote viewing, there's near-death experiences, this. It's all the same thing. It's all this consciousness stuff. So it's going to have an ET component to it, but it's going to be much more complex. I'd say it's much less physical than you think it is, and it's much more spiritual than you think it is.
Would you describe in detail the Mount Shasta UFO, and could the Mount Shasta portal actually be a beamed hologram?
That's the book I would like to do, except I keep getting dragged into this disclosure rat hole. But I had an encounter. My second message from an alien had to do with an event that occurred at Mount Shasta, August the 18th. There was two what are called antennas, and in the To the Stars people who are working with the experiencers in To the Stars, they also refer to antennas. Certain people have an antenna. They're able to communicate with this other phenomena, intelligence, whatever. And I got the message that there would be an event at 9:33 on August the 19th, what they call the program sighting. I was there at 9:33. This thing occurred over my head. I was sort of enthralled with how these people were able to predict when this event was going to take place, this UFO event. And I started to interview people who are involved in what are called Zendras. In our world, we call them portals, but they actually have this thing with Zendras where they're actually able to open Zendras, which are interdimensional bubbles created by the intelligence. And I interviewed a number of witnesses in two different events. In both events, there were 9 to 10 witnesses. They were inside this interdimensional bubble called a Zendra. I've got these all on camera. They're on most of them are on my YouTube channel. And I asked them, what did you see? And they described this 10-foot tall alien being. They described exactly the same thing. What he was wearing. And
the Zendra thing is interesting. We should do a show. We will do a show just about that, because I think there's two interesting things there. And if you do have the videos up, it's Whitehouse UFO is the name of the UFO, the YouTube channel where it is. But what I find intriguing is that so many of those cases come out of South America. So we're definitely going to do one just on that, because it's intriguing. Go ahead.
That is the important story. I say in 42 years, that is the most important story I've ever run across. It's a book I hope to have out maybe in October. I'm going back to Mount Shasta. In August, there's an event there. In September, there's an event there. I'm hoping I get to actually see an alien at the event. but I'm going to go through these Zendras. There's hundreds of them, and in some of the incidents, there's been 125 people go through these Zendras. Really not known. It's a Latino story, which is why nobody knows about it. It's all in Spanish. But the most important story I have run across in 42 years, without a doubt.
Yeah, fascinating. There is a great person out there, Meta Faith, and it's great to have you here, Meta. And if you feel like asking a question, please fire away. But what have you got? What's next?
Tim Taylor, experiencers is there any commonality between them? Any common demographics? Oh,
absolutely. I mean, this is, if you go to the free survey, well, hang on, I was just writing them down for a lecture. 78% say they're getting telepathic communication. 80% have had out-of-body experiences. 37% of all people who've interacted with the phenomena say they've had a near-death experience, which is over 5 times the national average. 76% have seen ghosts. 14%, the one that interests me the most, is the people who have flown the ship. And I think Tim Taylor knows Chris Bledsoe, who, when I heard he'd flown the ship, he's a good friend of mine, I said, hang on. And I gave him for 5 minutes. I said, Chris, go step by step. How do you fly a flying saucer? And 14% of all experiencers say they've flown the flying saucer, and they will all describe the fact that you become one with the craft. The craft is alive. You use your mind to fly the craft. So you have all these mental things that are with experiencers. Only 9% of experiencers, maybe even less than that now, think that ETs are evil. So, you know, you have all these people saying there's these evil aliens coming to eat us or whatever is going on. I say 9% isn't zero, but it's getting pretty close. There's a lot of, if you go to the free survey and look at their material, you will see very direct patterns. 50% of all experiencers either have been cured or have cured people. They're psychic. Almost every experiencer is got psychic abilities, tremendous number of things. And this is 4,000 experiencers. This is a lot of data. And you see very, very clear patterns that show distinct things that we should be looking at rather than watching lights in the sky.
I think the psychic aspect is really important to focus on. And if you go just with a nuts and bolts approach, you'll never get any real answers on it, although there's plenty of interesting data there to study. One quick thing I want to mention is there's a 1977 disclosure, part of one of your lectures, where you talk about this U.S. News and World Report quote, where they say, before the year is out, the government, perhaps the president, is expected to make what are described as unsettling disclosures about UFOs. Such revelations based on information from the CIA would be a reversal of official policy that in the past has downgraded UFO incidents. What is the background on that article? Is there anything to that?
Well, that was the idea that Jimmy Carter was making a move. They had heard the rumors that Jimmy Carter was doing with his press secretary. Jimmy Carter made about 5 or 6 different people. He would never directly hands-on, but he had all his people doing this kind of stuff. There was also rumors back in 74 and 75 about disclosures that from same sort of stuff coming out in U.S. media outlets that were describing disclosures. So the Bob Ebenegger thing was not isolated. It was being described in a number of UFO books and stuff. People were hearing these rumors, almost like now you're hearing these rumors about the fact that the government's about to drop this thing. They're doing this disclosure thing. All these people are coming out. 70s was between 74 and 77 was the same sort of atmosphere where people were having all these stories that the government was about to disclose.
It's fascinating. And it is interesting, if we look at that period, the 70s with Close Encounters, the culture is getting ready for it. In Search Of comes up during the 70s. There's a number of 70s movies. There's the Betty and Barney Hill story is a TV movie in that period. So absolutely, they're preparing the culture there.
And Bill Coleman, that Bob met with in the Pentagon, actually does a series in 78, 77, 78, I think it was, called UFO. And it was like the X-Files, but what it was the carrot thing. So you do the show was about a UFO sighting from Project Blue Book, and it would all look very great, whatever. And at the very end of the show, they would debunk it. So that's what they did. For 2 years, he ran this show. And this was I just call this a disclosure thing where you put it out and you pull it back.
Okay, so we have time for just a couple more questions. And people have asked some questions about the time capsule. and some of the Nixon disclosures. There is a new video that's going to be coming out. I'm going to do a new one for next week with updates, and we'll keep you posted on everything that's happening there. Pretty much my appearance on Coast yesterday and the video that we did last night brings us up to date on that, but certainly Merritt's story. One of the things I wanted to mention is that Merritt has distributed the information to a very tight circle of a couple of people so that, you know, the information isn't going to go away, as it were. Okay, so find the best couple of questions.
Alien protocols again. Grant, if I had UFO material and evidence, who should I send it to?
That's a really good question.
Well, we had a bunch. We tried to go to the New York Times. They wouldn't buy some of our stories. We had some pretty heavy stuff. They're the ones that everybody seems to pay attention to. If you can get the New York Times to take it, this Blumenthal guy is coming out with a book on John Mack. He's very much into the subject. I don't know what his background is. Very much he helped write the article. New York Times would be the place to go. If you can sell it to New York Times, that is where everybody pays attention. That's when they paid attention to the stars. And the other one, they paid attention when Hillary Clinton, they wrote the article on Hillary Clinton with the UFO disclosure in May the 10th of 2016. The very next day, there was 2 questions asked in the White House press room, and a couple days later, another one. The New York Times seems to be able to initiate the attention of the government.
Fascinating.
Okay, Kids Future. Does Grant have any info on Nibiru? I think he just interviewed Michael Lee Hill.
Yeah, I just interviewed Michael. We're putting that up on. I'm not an Anunnaki guy. I have enough trouble figuring out what I'm doing now. We did an interview with Michael Lee Hill. Michael Lee Hill, the reason I actually wanted to interview him is he was contacted by Bob Bigelow. He was part of the program. Bob Bigelow came to him, and he tells a story about what Bob's investigator told him about what was going on, the connection between his sightings over Michigan, the Anunnaki, and the fact that the Bigelow, the Skinwalker is all tied in. So you'll have to listen to Michael Lee Hill, but he gets into the Anunnaki, which I'm not an expert on, but it's an interesting story that seems to be taken very seriously by Bob Bigelow's investigation team.
Wow. I do want to point out that the hopeful volunteerist is out there. And I know that you tried to ask a question last time. We've interacted before. So if you have a question, pop it up there. We're going to take just a couple more questions, and then we're going to wrap it up. One thing I want to really emphasize to people is that with all the craziness that's been going on with YouTube, make sure that you do, if you're subscribed to Whitehouse UFO, or if you're subscribed to Dark Journalist, to seek out the website, so to go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for the newsletter for updates for these things, so that, we've been hearing about all these YouTube channels that go down that are dealing with controversial information. So make sure that you're dealing directly. And in Grant's case, it is presidentialufos.com, isn't it?
Yeah, although I really don't, we're going to try to rebuild the website. I don't put that much on that site anymore. I was also convinced the YouTube way is the way to go, is that most people have like 15 minutes as they go to work and they want to watch a video for 15 minutes. They really don't want to read a book. They want to, and so the younger people have convinced me this is the way to go. So I'm spending a lot more time just putting up little short videos rather than lengthy articles that nobody reads.
Good. Well, you have the time here when we have it, and people can really get that full picture, and that's what we do at Dark Journalist. But I think the little short updates are good format for you, actually. Although I know you're always working on another book anyway. All right.
Yeah, and this is important, like with yours. I mean, just to consider that when I do an interview with you or you do interviews, I mean, you look at the numbers that you attract. I mean, you're like talking to stadiums full of people. I've always been very disappointed in lecturing to UFO conferences that you go into a UFO conference, you work on a lecture for 2 months, you go in there and there's like 75 people, and those are the only people that ever hear that lecture. And I always thought, this is such a total waste of my time. I mean, it doesn't matter. The YouTube is the way to go. You take a look at some of the numbers that if you get into a hot topic, there's a lot of people watching. You are changing consciousness, and that's what it's all about. Absolutely.
We have a huge crowd tonight. I think our either our biggest or our second biggest crowd ever. So absolutely. I totally agree. All right. We're going to take the final 2 questions and we'll wrap it up. But it's been fantastic. This is an incredible overview and ties so well into, if we're trying to find the truth around the Nixon administration and some of the things that Robert Merritt has brought forward. Now there's much more of a foundation to look at it. And, you know, because of the Emma Neger video, because of Grant's working knowledge of that, we have a better foundation. And so, you know, we understand the conditions under which the time capsule was placed. It sort of supports Merritt's story so well. Okay, so I'm going to leave it to you.
So, Free Soul, do you believe the Charles Hall story about the tall whites and Ray Daw? And what does Grant know about Phil Schneider?
Well, let's do the tall whites, Grant, because that's an interesting one, and I've never been able to figure it out. So what do you got?
I've never really studied the story. It's one of these things, like a single whistleblower story. It's very hard to sort of determine. What I was told through Chris Bledsoe was that it was for real. And Chris Bledsoe, to me, whatever Chris Bledsoe says, you can take it to the bank. So he knows something I don't know. That's all I can really say is if Chris Bledsoe says there's reality to that story, there's reality to that story. But I've never studied it myself.
Certainly Charles seems like an honest guy, and his story is fascinating. Okay, what else you got?
Okay, so CC Jarvis, please ask Grant if he has heard of Alien Mountain north of Kamloops.
No.
I've never heard of that one either. That's a tricky one. We've got the Nixon Pyramid from North Dakota. We've got that one. Never heard of Alien Mountain. Okay, but we'll take a better final question. What do you got?
Okay, Matt Lacasse. Did I already ask this one? Do they have ETs hidden somewhere still?
Do they have ETs hidden somewhere still? That's a great question. In your opinion, Grant, do we still have, like we did in the 80s, a live ET somewhere?
Well, Melinda Leslie, if you listen to Melinda Leslie, her evidence, the MILAB evidence indicates they may be working with them. The live alien story, there was 3 EBs, 1, 2, and 3. The third one left in the 1990s. That's that story. Dead ones for sure. We have them, and apparently they're all over the place. Area 51, Kennedy was taken to an Air Force base in Florida and shown bodies. You have the Nixon story. So a lot of dead bodies, but in terms of live ones, I sort of think that the aliens really wouldn't want to deal with us because they're really not on the same sort of plane. They're at a different vibrating level, and I can't really see them working with us because basically, like with the Nimitz thing, we tried to shoot the thing down. I really can't see that we're sort of interacting with these people.
We're still doing a kind of clunky military approach to them, and I can definitely see the point on that. CC Jarvis, the thing about the Alien Mountain, if you have something on that, you can email it to info@darkjournalist.com because I do want to hear about what it is. We just don't have a good answer for you on that. Okay, Olivia, you're up. We'll do the final question.
Well, here's the ultimate question. The Carr Truth Report. When do you think disclosure will happen?
Many, many years. Chris Bledsoe, there's a guy, his name escapes me, a NASA guy, Hal Povenmire, gave a date of 2025. I think the longer they take to do this, the better they think it's going to be. They're going to drag this thing out for a long time because it's always the fear of once it starts to unravel, can you control the story? Are you going to get blamed for all the stuff that happened? So they're doing, to me, disclosure, if you look it up in the dictionary, says to reveal. They are revealing more and more and more all the time. It's a gradual process. But as far as I'm concerned, they have no absolute intention of full disclosure. If they did, they'd stand the president up. They would allow the president to answer the question that was asked last month or 2 months ago about to Donald Trump. They would answer the question. They're not answering the question. They are not interested in disclosure. That is not in the playbook anytime in the future.
Fascinating. The Hopeful Volunteers did show up on the chart, and she asked, do you think aliens live by voluntary cooperative interaction?
That's one of the things I say is one of the 64 reasons they're not going to disclose, that if you sort of understand alien mentality, you realize that they don't have any designer clothes, they don't have any gold, they don't have any they don't have any poor people, they don't have any medical problems. Basically, they are not communists, but they're pretty close to it. If you think that we have trouble with Mexicans and those type of aliens, the philosophy of these people is you put in what you can contribute, you take out only what you need. This is so un-American. It's so anti-capitalist. The aliens are the farthest thing from capitalists in the world. That is one of the big things that is really going to get ugly if it actually is disclosed. Because if you look, there's They have nothing physical about them at all. If you look at the craft, you look at what they're doing, they don't seem to eat. They don't seem to have sex. They don't have chandeliers. They don't have, you know, leather furniture. They don't have designer clothes. There's really nothing physical at all.
I guess Villas Boas had sex in the 50s, so maybe some of them do. Yeah, absolutely. Grant, incredible information and such a wide range. You know, it's funny because people will say, well, in the UFO field, you can't get good stuff or whatever. Grant's information is top notch. You're the best research guy out there. And I really appreciate you coming on and giving us this real background on the 70s, 90s, and into the 2000s disclosure. It's a crucial history and a crucial foundation. And people can, of course, find your work at Whitehouse UFO on YouTube. And we hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you. I appreciate your interest, and I appreciate the questions. You have some knowledgeable people who have asked some very good, insightful questions. Thanks.
We have a great audience for sure, and they got a great show with Grant tonight. Thank you, everyone. It's fantastic to have everyone here. This is Friday night, but this has been a crucial week of getting this story out and covering everything about Merritt's revelations, as well as everything about the time capsule and the updates there from the letter of Douglas Caddy to the National Archives. Now, next week, I will be on Phenomenon Radio with Linda Moulton Howe, going deeper into detail, and we'll do a special video next week. And both Linda and Catherine Austin Fitz are coming on the show. So it's going to be a powered up couple of weeks, and I'm really glad that everyone's going to be on board for that. Olivia, you did fantastic. Do you have any last questions?
Was chaos.
That's more like it. Of course, Olivia handled everything very well, and
it might be a good idea to mention the documentary again so people can find it on YouTube.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Well, Grant mentioned the second name, which I wasn't familiar with, but the first name was UFOs Past, Present, and Future, right?
That's not the way it's on the internet. It's on UFOs It Has Begun. The other one, it's not on the internet as far as I know. But UFOs It Has Begun is the same one. They just added the cattle mutilation stuff in 1979.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And that's the one I've seen, though, because it's Jacques Vallée is in that one.
Yeah, it's the same one. It's just an updated version. They actually put up 3 times, 75, 76, then they redid it in 79. So I guess they wanted the audience increased or replay it. They were asked to replay it 3 times. So it came out 3 times, not just once.
Amazing. And it's quite a document, I will say, for that period. And just to understand the background behind it and giving us that whole thrust behind the Nixon disclosure post Blue Book, which is also quite the mystery. And I think one of the best points that you made here tonight is, why did they reignite that fire? We might get some of those answers in Merritt's time capsule disclosure. That might be what the missing piece is there. It could very well be. Did you have something?
Yeah. Could you show that picture again from the museum? Actually, the one of the alien.
Oh, okay. So that's the UFOs Past, Present, and Future with Emma Nager. And the one with the museum, which I got, that's directly from Grant's lecture, which was a great lecture on different stages of disclosure. And I'll put up a link to that, actually, because I got so much from that. But that's the picture. So what did you want to say, Olivia?
They were just confused. Could you explain that to the audience a little bit?
Yeah,
well, the one is from the documentary, and the other one is from a British museum. And you can see the braiding in the hair, the long nose, and they even have the staff. It's holding a staff in both. And that's where Michael Luckman had come to me and said, this is a hoax. They made this whole thing up. And so I asked Bob about it, and he said, well, that was Chartle's version of what he had seen. And that was the whole idea that.
It's fascinating to me that there's the Sumerian theme that comes out there. And then in 76, you got the 12th planet with Sitchin and all that. There's some kind of a tie that's going on with Sumerian. And I don't know if it's an engineered thing or if there's a genuine link there that they're trying to point out, but it is interesting.
Yeah.
Grant, fantastic. And I hope you have a great night. We're going to talk to you soon, though, because there's so much going on and we have so many good topics to go over with you. So keep up the great work. I'm going to be watching your channel for all the exciting stuff you have coming up. Tell us again where you're going to be in San Francisco and when.
March. It's the weekend of March 23rd, 24th. Melinda and I are going to go through a replay she has actually interacted with a lot. You're familiar. She did the interview with Jim Semivan. And what I didn't realize that she's done this for like 30 years. And she's interacted with a lot of the Avery characters. I always make the joke, I stay one step removed from my victim. I really don't interact with anybody. And I just sort of sit on the sidelines and listen to what everybody says. Melinda has interacted. And for the first time, she is going to talk about some of the key players, who they were and what they told her. And what she's basically going to say is that she was told that there are people who are manipulating the field. And the idea is they are there to spin the story, make it go in the direction they want, and to keep you away from classified material, which is basically the same thing I've said on my 30 years of research. So I didn't know she'd done this. So we're going to do this joint lecture where she's going to go through all the people that she talked to, and some of the people, she's going to out some people that are researchers, who they were, who she talked to, how she interacted with these people. And then I'm going to do the latest, the Tom DeLonge thing, how it fits in. So she does the first 25 years, and I'm going to do the last 5 years. Fantastic. And it all ties together. We're talking the same characters. So whenever she sees my stuff, she tells people, this is your homework. Watch Grant's thing. This is the way it works, because she discovered exactly what I discovered. And I just didn't know that she'd worked on this as long as I have. She just kept very quiet about the fact that she's actually interacted with these people, which is one step removed from me.
It's great. The combination, I'm going to look forward to that, actually. And Melinda does great work combined with the stuff that you're finding out. I think it's going to be excellent. That's in San Francisco. What's the date on it?
It's the weekend of, I'm not sure, 23rd, 24th, 25th. It's the Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Steve Bassett's going to be there. Danny Sheehan is going to be speaking as well. Danny Sheehan is going to give his version. He knows what's going on with Melinda, with me. He's going to give the background because, as you know, he worked on Iran-Contra and stuff, and he's going to give you the background to the stars, how it works in terms of what's actually going on in the background, because he's dealt with these people. He's dealt with these black ops operations. So he's going to give a lecture, and Steve Bassett, Melinda and I, and it's all on this operation, what we've been talking about tonight. The whole weekend is going to be on
Fantastic.
this.
And Sheehan always does incredible work, too. He's that deep state knowledge. Olivia?
Sorry, there was one last question from ET Disclosure.
Sure.
Can you ask really quick when he thinks the next New York Times article will come out, as Melinda said, probably before March?
No, it's interesting. I think Grant said it was all that he knew was it was going to be on a Sunday, and they didn't specify.
Well, there's a major event going to happen on a Sunday. Okay, there's a major event. It's not a newspaper article. It's another event, and will happen on a Sunday. I was told January, but it's the same sort of thing. It's like whether they're dragging this thing out on purpose, or whether it's like Jim Semivan says that they want to make sure they get it right this time when they come out. But for a year, there was all these things that everybody thought Tom DeLonge was making this up. It's all garbage he's making. And then suddenly it came out. And it's the same sort of thing. Like Jim Semivan told us it would be out by the end of the month. Leslie Kane just did an article or an interview about 2 weeks ago, and she said she can just confirm the fact that she's working on an article. I asked the Washington Post, I asked Politico, who were the other ones that did the article on exactly the same morning, coincidence, and they won't talk to me whether they're working on another article. But the New York Times did state that it was one of the biggest circulations that I've ever had. So you can bet they're doing another article. And that's what's confirmed. That's why I did the interview with Michael Lee Hill. He confirmed that he was interviewed by the New York Times. Now, it wasn't Leslie. It was another person at New York Times who is working on the Bob Bigelow connection. So you're going to see articles, but I don't think they really are in a hurry to get this stuff out. They realize that it's a slow sort of process, and they mostly want to get it. They're manipulating it. They're making it go down a certain route. They want to make sure it's done right rather than done fast. Because if they wanted to do it fast, they could drop all the videos at one time. They could drop all the documents at one time. They could tell us what's going on with the experiences. They could do all the 4 different types of metals or whatever they have. They're not. It's this gradual drip, drip, drip. That's part of the play. That's part of the game.
Fascinating.
Where's Grant going to be lecturing in San Francisco?
The information is, what is the name of the lecture in San Francisco, the place?
That's UFO Con. If they look up, it's the California UFO Con. It's run by Lorian Fenton.
Right, yeah. Okay.
So UFO Con, and you'll see all the people there.
Fantastic. Great to have everyone here. Of course, to keep updated, go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for the free newsletter. So all those shows we have coming up, you know when they're going to hit, and all the rest of it. Whitehouse UFO is the YouTube channel for Grant. Follow Grant's information. You're going to get the best stuff there. And he's a major source for me in the work that I do. And really appreciate it, Grant. And we'll have you back soon.
Okay, thanks. And just one last thing to remember. Melinda had said that Jim Semivan and Hal Putoff watch all my updates. So they're watching you too.
Now we're talking. That's a good way to end a Friday night. Grant, fantastic. Really appreciate it. And Olivia, what can I say?
Grant.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. You're great questions tonight and a great audience. We could have got to more of them, but next week we will. And we'll talk to you soon. Yeah. No, those were good.